Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. So in this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto inherits Zabuza's sword and Masater Fuinjutsu. This is part 1 and if you want more then please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also check it out, letting the lukewarm water wash away all of his recently accrued stress and grime. A 15-year-old blonde shinobi couldn't help but sigh as the grimace he wore on his face shifted to a look of determination. Naruto Uzumaki had a mission, and he damned sure wouldn't shy away from the task he had been assigned by the last person one would think possible. Zabuza Mamachi, demon of the hidden mist and notorious S-rank missing nin from Kiri. His first mission as a shinobi outside of the Leaf Village that he called home was a complete fiasco, and the young Uzumaki had learned what being a ninja truly meant during that fateful clash on the bridge that had liberated Wave Country. It was there that he had fought for his life alongside his recently formed team, which consisted of Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Kakashi Haddock. As his merciful enemy Haku had explained to him as he cradled Sasuke's needle-ridden body, the way of shinobi meant the possibility of death to not only himself, but the precious few he cared about. For many years during his sabotaged academy training, he had hated the Uchiha prince with a passion that was wholeheartedly reciprocated, but then it had happened. Sasuke had pushed him out of the way of that deadly attack that came from the powerful ice-using ninja that had later been identified as the same person he had befriended in that clearing after a hard day's work and gaining more strength, and despite everything he could possibly conceive, he just couldn't figure out why. Sasuke told him his body had moved all on its own, but that just didn't make any sense at all to the Jinchuriki. All his life he had been either emotionally or physically harmed by the majority of his home village due to the fact that he houses a demon fox within him for the purpose of keeping those very same people safe. He couldn't fully comprehend the notion of someone actually defending his life, but running his hands through his messy mop of hair, the young ninja shrugged off his confusion and decided to focus on the matter at hand. His new mission. The mission that he couldn't and wouldn't fail, even if it costed him his life. Yugura, the fourth Mizukage, and the Jinchuriki of the three-tailed turtle. Naruto couldn't understand how someone so similar to him could do what he was doing to the country he ruled over, but in a way Naruto had more of a grudge against his fellow Jinchuriki than Zabuza ever had. Naruto dreamed of being a Kage himself and protecting his home, despite being ostracized and violated during his difficult life, so why would Yugura, after gaining the most prestigious position in the lands, squander it by killing off people who had suffered such similar hardships? Haku had been a victim of the ongoing bloodline purges that were a curse to those born different in Water Country, and even Zabuza apparently had been, which was the reason he worked for that bastard Gato in the first place. He could still remember the man's dying request to him after Haku sacrificed his life to save his, and Naruto moved his battered body next to the young ninja he had formerly regarded as a tool to be disposed of. After dropping the kunai knife Naruto had tossed into his mouth before Zabuza recklessly tore through Gaeta's hired thugs and plunged it into the shipping magnate's chest, the demon looked to him with a peculiar expression that Naruto couldn't quite place. Was it hope, recognition, respect? Naruto couldn't tell for sure, but he damn sure remembered what was said and what happened afterwards. How could he not? Brat. Naruto. Looks like this is the end of the line for me. Take my sword. I can't trust anyone else with it, and cough cough. And my hideout. Northeast of here. Everything I own. Go there and become strong. Stronger than I ever was. The Mizukage. Yugura. He's like you. But you're different. You haven't become the demon that he is. He kills for no reason. So many. That's why I tried. But I failed. You have to kill him, Naruto, or I don't know how many more will suffer from his bloodline purge. Promise me. Promise me you'll stop him. Naruto could only look down at Zabuza with wide eyes at the man's fading existence in the realm of the living, not knowing how to respond. Then it clicked. Yugura was like him, but he was the cause of all of this. He was the real reason Haku had suffered and joined Zabuza. He was the real reason Haku was dead. Zabuza was just a man with a mission that many people would consider impossible. He could almost still feel the powerful red chakra flowing through his body, augmenting his pathetic ability enough to overwhelm even a shinobi that Sasuke stood no chance against. A shinobi that had disabled Zabuza in a single blow, with nothing but a senbon needle no less. It was then that he could only dumbly nod at Zabuza, who stared into his eyes with a look of content as his voice trailed off even more. Good. Cough cough. Now. Take the kunai. And finish me. It's my last request. I don't want to die. Because of a wound one of them gave me. It has to be you. Someone worthy. Cough cough cough. Naruto instantly protested, but the stern look in Zabuza's eyes stopped his panic and somehow he understood. to Zabuza, who had basically just left him his legacy, dying at his hand was the last small mercy that life would grant him. The blonde hesitantly grabbed the knife after a short while of numb clarity, and he didn't know why the tears started flowing, but they just did. Naruto Uzumaki understood Zabuza Mamachi in that fated moment, and the entire world seemed to shift as his hand plunged into the man's heart, almost seeming to move in slow motion. Zabuza in that moment had become something like a father to Naruto, as crazy as it had seemed. Haku had become like a brother or sister, whatever he was. He wasn't betraying the Ice Shinobi's brave sacrifice in that moment, but instead he was only solidifying it. He was taking the mantle that was Zabuza's purpose in existing, and Zabuza was passing the torch to the only person he could depend on. Him. Blood splattered, soaking Naruto's trembling hand as the kunai dug into Zabuza's chest with little resistance. He couldn't even hear Sakura's cries as she knelt and sobbed over Sasuke's unmoving form, and he didn't even register the fact that Kakashi-sensei had collapsed from chakra exhaustion a minute or so earlier. All he saw was the look of contentment on Zabuza's face as he breathed his final breaths and the nod the man have him as he unconsciously uttered the words that he ultimately lived by. "I'll stop him, Zabuza. I give you my word and I never break my word. That's my ninja way. Believe it." Days and maybe even years seemed to pass as their eyes never faltered, looking directly into each other's souls as flames seemed to fade from Zabuza's eyes and intensify in Naruto's. Then the demon of the mist closed his eyes for the final time, and Naruto didn't think before making a few shadow clones to check on his downed comrades and take Zabuza and Haku to bury them both in the clearing where he first met Haku. After that he didn't even register the roaring celebration as the freed inhabitants of Wave Country converged on the bridge or the fact that said bridge was named after him shortly thereafter. He had a mission. It didn't take long his teammates to wake up at all, and none of them had any idea that he wasn't really there with them. He had left a multitude of shadow clones to watch over them all, and since Sakura was strangely subdued, his doppelganger wasn't dispelled from her violent tendency to lash out in anger at him. The blonde was almost emotionless as he eventually found the hideout, emptying it of all its contents in a robotic sort of way. At that time he didn't even really know what he was grabbing, he just took everything he saw and sealed it into the storage scrolls that played about. He didn't really know anything about sealing, but since he was previously intrigued by the art of Fuinjutsu due to his unique situation with the demon fox, he knew how to at least use a storage scroll. The old man had been kind enough to demonstrate for him once before, while explaining that he wasn't the Kyuubi, and now that demonstration was truly a blessing, considering that the Kubikirabacho Zanbato sword that Zabuza wielded so expertly was larger than he was. It didn't take him longer than half an hour to seal everything away, and after that he just went back to Tazuna the bridge builder's house and slept. He slept like he never had before. Naruto didn't even wash the blood off of his hands until he made it back to Konoha a few days later. Until just now, as he stood for a couple hours in his small shower and let the water wash everything away. Shivering a little as the water began running colder and colder, Naruto gave an appreciative nod thinking of Haku and how his ice techniques were infinitely more worse than the chill he now had. After exiting his bathroom and drying off quickly, the young man decided to make a clone to boil some water for instant ramen while he finally unsealed everything Zabuza had left him. Grabbing the scrolls from his pack and placing them in the middle of his tiny living area, Naruto reverently knelt beside them with a look of determination and began getting down to business. A few minutes later, the boy almost fainted because of what he found within. Everything he would ever need. Recovering from the initial shock, Naruto couldn't help but chuckle as he thumbed through the massive pile of Ryo one of the scrolls had unleashed before him. There were also numerous pieces of reading material, ranging everywhere from outdated and updated bingo books to jutsu scrolls consisting of water-nature techniques. There were also many articles of clothing, most likely due to necessity more than a desire to be fashionable. Since Zabuza and Haku were constantly on the run as missing nin, Naruto thought it made a lot of sense to be able to change appearances. There was also a multitude of swords, well 3 to be exact besides Zabuza's Zanbato. One was a basic ninjato, another a katana and the final one a shirasaya. He seemed drawn to the shirasaya and the kubikirabacho, and he also held a great respect for the senbon needles that Haku had all but decimated him with previously. There were also a few unusual kunai present, as instead of the straight kind he was used to using they all had curved blades. After some more rummaging, Naruto found that he now had books and scrolls on human anatomy, herbs and poison, psychology, and surprisingly blacksmithing. There was also a cookbook that he had to guess was Heike's, along with a blank black notebook that instantly grabbed his attention for some reason. He didn't even hesitate to open it, foregoing the others for some odd reason, but upon finding out what was within he felt his heart hitch because of its content. It was Heike's journal. Opening it to the first page with barely contained excitement, Naruto looked forward to learning more about their journey and began reading at his slow pace. Zabuza-sama and I are going on a mission today, and because of our run-in with the hunter Nin during our assassination of that corrupt councilman, I've decided to keep this journal from this point on. I know that as a tool I may need to kill my heart for the sake of my precious person, but I've still been learning everything I can learn about healing techniques. Ever since Era has passed I haven't been able to sleep well, and maybe I'm not cut out for this life. I have made a vow however. The next time I will not be helpless as someone dies in front of me, and my conviction of protecting what's important to me will never cease or wane. I've also been developing my snow leopard jutsu with unwavering commitment, and I am glad to say it's coming along well. I may not be much of an artist, but I have still been drawing the techniques that feel natural to me and the philosophy behind them. I have resolved to make Zabuza proud of my ability, and nothing will stop us from achieving his goals. P.S. The grilled eel and squid we shared was the best I've ever eaten. Naruto hungrily read more and more entries that Haku wrote down, not even noticing the amount of time that seemed to pass. He eventually found something that left him gobsmacked about halfway through the journal, after learning of countless encounters with other ninja and completed missions. It's a beautiful day today, and Zabuza seemed most pleased with my performance during our mission to Kumo. We are now heading toward Whirlpool Country, the ancestral land of the Uzumaki clan, with hopes of finding powerful sealing techniques. The Uzumaki clan were famous for Fuinjutsu, Kinjutsu, and using chains formed of their chakra that could even suppress tailed beasts. Zabuza-sama has even stated that a certain Uzumaki once sealed off an entire village and he only narrowly escaped, and I thank Kami he managed to. Apparently the village was destroyed, and my clan once were part of the shinobi force before we became refugees when Kumo and Iwa destroyed them in their fear. It is truly a saddening tale for such powerful ninja to have been killed because of their own vast potentials. I can only hope we succeed in finding what he desires, and perhaps I can learn more about my Kekai Genkai if we're fortunate enough. The whirlpools surrounding the country have deterred us so far however, so I am skeptical if we'll even make it ashore, the place where my ancestors once resided. P.S. The tempura we ate together was delicious. Naruto couldn't believe what he had read, and he reread it several times before turning the page and becoming a bit disappointed. Apparently they never made it to Whirlpool, and they almost died, to be honest. There was a creature that kept all vessels back, and even if they could get past there were still the powerful whirlpools to bypass as well. In the end they decided to take more missions and gain anything they could from plotting the corpses of the shinobi they killed off. Naruto had ways wanted to know about his family, and now it seemed he had a lead to go on. The blonde was enthralled and excited about the idea of making chakra chains. He couldn't believe he came from a great clan of ninja when he lived in such poverty his entire life, but somehow it felt right to him. Gigi did tell him that his parents had enemies that he couldn't handle at this point, and now Naruto understood why. If anyone ever knew he was an Uzumaki clan member, he could at the very least expect Kumo and Iwa to send assassins to make sure he was deadened. But the visible frown Naruto kept reading, eventually stumbling upon a few interesting entries involving shinobi that Zabuza had history with. One's name was Mei Terumi, a kunoichi that held 2 Kekai Genkai and shared Zabuza's goal of liberating Kiri. The other was with a fellow swordsman of the mist named Kisame, a man that apparently overpowered Haku and Zabuza with ease and caused them to retreat. If such a shinobi could exist, Naruto didn't ever want to fight him. That was for sure. After making a mental note to try and find them in the bingo books that were once Zabuza's, Naruto kept reading until he finally found an entry that he was mentioned in. It was from the day he first met Haku. The day I met an interesting shinobi named Naruto Uzumaki, and despite the fact that I was about to kill him as he slept, I couldn't bring myself to do it for some reason. I can't explain why, but even though I've killed before and he is a hindrance to our mission, it felt wrong. I found out that in many ways he is much like myself, an orphan that grew up despised and unwanted for whatever the reason. He didn't tell me why, but I could clearly see the sadness and loneliness in his eyes when he told me of his situation with his teammates and village. I hope he took my words to heart, as I could see that his reason for growing stronger wasn't enough. He wants acknowledgement and he wants his existence to be appreciated. I can honestly say that I value his existence for some reason I can't explain, and I don't look forward to facing him when Zabuza-sama recovers. He's a cute boy with a good heart, and I don't know why, but maybe in another life, we could have been friends. Maybe even more. That is if he didn't think I was a boy. P.S. Naruto has the most beautiful blue eyes and yellow hair I've ever seen. The blonde couldn't help but let a few tears loose as he reread the entry again and the couple afterwards that mentioned him. Haku had apparently been spying on him from afar, admiring the commitment he showed during his self-imposed training to trump Sasuke and master tree walking. The final entry was brief, and Naruto felt his heart almost explode from what he read. The day is the day I've been dreading, but to reach Zabuza-sama's goal, I will kill my heart if necessary. But something tells me I won't be able to, and I can only hope that Naruto-kun and Zabuza-sama live on. Tears dropped continuously on the page as Naruto remembered his epic battle with a kunoichi that he thought was the most beautiful person he had ever met. Why couldn't she have lived? Why couldn't Zabuza have lived? Why couldn't he have helped them reach their goals? Why did he have feelings for Haku that he couldn't explain? He was sure of it. If they had met some other way, she would have made a wonderful wife. Someone to spend his life with. Someone who would always hold him as precious and even worth dying for like she did for Zabuza. And he would have done the same for her. The look of fierce determination was now on his face, the tears whittling away as he reached for a few scrolls with crude illustrations that seemed very familiar. It was Heike's Taijutsu, picture and notes that made for a very detailed resource, with only the most important points taken note of. Haku would live on through him, and he would become strong enough to free Kiri and protect everyone. That was even more important to him than becoming Hokage, and Naruto would waste no time in achieving their mission. It was time to get serious. As if on cue, the Uzumaki's alarm clock blared signaling that it was time to head to Training Ground 7, and Naruto didn't even think before creating a single clone to go in his stead. He had research to do and plans to form. 20 minutes later. Arriving at Training Ground 7 in record time, Naruto's shadow clone awaited his team unconcerned by Kakashi-sensei's chronic tardiness and thought about what the boss would do in order to make it to Whirlpool. Of course it considered going to the old man Hokage to demand answers about the Uzumaki clan and requesting a trip to his homeland, but somehow he knew the discussion probably wouldn't end well. While Naruto may not have been the sharpest kunai in the holster, he had experienced enough disappointment to know better. The old man would probably ask how he found out about the Uzumaki clan in the first place, and after denying his request, Naruto would probably be put under close scrutiny to make sure he didn't leave the village without permission. It was during this contemplation that a flock of crows decided to fly over his prone form, and one of the mischievous birds decided to let its bowels loose at precisely the right moment, dropping a gooey white bomb of feces directly between his eyes. Damn it, you bastards, get back here. Forgetting his previous train of thought, Naruto was about to try and tree hop and chase the bastards when an interesting thought popped into his mind. A shit-eating grin instantly plastered itself on his face most ironically, and wiping his face clean with a sleeve, the blonde did a complete flip and began thanking the birds along with Kami. Haku had mentioned in her journal that Naruto's transformation was something unique that she had never witnessed before, and both her and Zabuza were impressed by his performance when he and Sasuke freed Kakashi when he transformed into a shuriken. If he could turn into a shuriken, why couldn't he turn into a raven? If he could accomplish that, then he could just fly to Whirlpool, and he wouldn't even have to worry about the sea monster or the unforgiving waters that surrounded the deserted country. Just as he was about to test his new idea out, Sasuke appeared with his usual moody look and his hands in his pockets. Turning to the Uchiha that had tried to save his life, Naruto actually smiled for once at the boy he used to hate vehemently. It wasn't returned, however, and Naruto couldn't explain why, but he knew something was off with the boy he now considered something of a friend. "Hey Sasuke, what's up? Naruto, how did you do it?" Although Sasuke asked the question in a soft voice, Naruto could feel the underlying emotion in the query, although he was genuinely confused. "What? How did you defeat that ninja after I saved your sorry ass?" Naruto now looked a bit affronted by the boy's words, and frowning he replied. "I don't know. I guess I just got lucky." Sasuke seemed to briefly be overcome with rage at his answer for whatever reason, and Naruto honestly didn't know why. Truth be told, Sasuke hadn't said anything to him since they returned from Wave earlier that morning, and Naruto had just chalked it up as his usually reclusive disposition. Little did he know that Sasuke had been brooding and wondering about what happened the entire way back, and Kakashi had only temporarily satiated his need to know with an elusive answer that revealed nothing worthwhile. Tensing up and taking a step toward the blonde, Sasuke then declared. "HN. There's no such thing as luck in our world, loser. There's only power. Now that I have these eyes, I'll make you show me your strength, and I'll be one step closer to my ambition." Naruto's eyes went wide upon seeing the red eyes of the Uchiha, and he barely noticed that there were two markings in his right eye and one in his left before Sasuke charged him. As he leapt to the side, rolled, and righted himself up, it would be difficult to notice the change to the casual observer. While Sasuke clearly was much more skilled in hand-to-hand combat than Naruto ever was, there was a subtle edge about the Uzumaki that only those who have killed moved with. It was as if he had evolved during the crazy mission to Wave Country, with the very first step being his encounter with the Demon Brothers. After that vow he made, clamming up even in the most dire situations was all but non-existent to Naruto. The second step would have been the first encounter with Zabuza, during which his quick thinking had managed to free his sensei from the man's water prison. After that was the dramatic increase in speed after he learned tree walking. But what may have been most effective was what Zabuza made him do. In a way, the two of them had given each other the most precious gift imaginable. Naruto had given him closure before his passing, and Zabuza had given him the steel resolve needed to take a life, something that would change anyone no matter what the circumstances. He had given Naruto his first kill, and it was a first kill that left behind no guilt. While Naruto had been surprised by the initial assault that Sasuke launched, he still managed to avoid the jumping roundhouse that would have knocked a grown man unconscious had it landed. The clone had a strange look of emotionless determination, an unknown switch somewhere in its psyche, having been flipped the moment Sasuke rushed forward. While it wasn't quite as serious as when he fought Mizuki and defended Iruka-sensei, the sharpness of his eyes were quite similar to that occasion. He didn't want to hurt Sasuke strangely enough, but even if he was a clone, he wasn't going to stand around and get hit. Not anymore. It almost was as if Sasuke wasn't even there, but instead the only thing there was his mission. Yugura. He didn't even know it, and he probably never would, but this moment was something that had occurred before. In another time before Naruto was even born, this same type of conflict had happened between multiple individuals just like him and Sasuke. The Uchiha's mindset was extremely similar to Naruto's at this moment, as he berated himself and Naruto because of what he had done on the bridge. Sasuke was an avenger, and he almost died. Protecting the loser. It was unacceptable, and even though he saw the blonde as a hindrance at first, he knew his feelings about Naruto had changed. Naruto was his friend. His only friend. The two genin were more alike than anyone would ever know, and both of them were linked together by fate itself to be rivals. Both of them one of the last of their respective clans. Both of them knowing the pain of being orphans. Both of them with a mission to kill. And both of their targets being extremely powerful. But there was a difference between them, something that completely differentiated them from one another. Naruto sought companionship, while Sasuke shunned such a thing. Sasuke was hell-bent on revenge, although he had yet to end a single life. Naruto was determined to free Kiri, an act that could only be described as protecting hundreds, or maybe even thousands of people from death. The Eddie had killed, albeit not in cold blood. Still, the blonde had changed. This was first realized when he didn't try to stop a skirmish with Sasuke, or even taunt the Uchiha. All he knew was Yugura at that moment, and placing his hands in a ram seal, the boy concentrated already making a plan like he did in Wave. Sasuke had the decency to scoff at the 8 doppelganger that appeared, saying to Naruto with a mocking tone of voice. TCH. 8 times nothing is still nothing. Now come on loser. Team. The blondes yelled as 6 of them converged on Sasuke, as the 2 that remained with Naruto poofed in smoke as he waited. The clones didn't even get close, as the predictive analytical eye that was his Sharingan gave him an edge formerly unseen. Jumping up swiftly, the Uchiha landed 4 swift kicks that used the first clone to jump off of and hit 3 more with quick split-like kicks. The last 2 clones were then dispelled mid-swing, Sasuke throwing a vicious uppercut and then a hook that hit them both where they didn't even see it coming. As the smoke cleared, Naruto had already circled around with a kunai in hand, or at least that's what it would seem to be. The boy let out a loud battle cry, and he managed the first part of his impromptu plan by gaining Sasuke's attention. The Uchiha didn't even see the kunai that Naruto had tossed, while the smoke from his clones concealed his movements from Sasuke, and the Uchiha Avenger seeing that Naruto was attacking for real ran to meet his rival halfway. Then as when it happened, Naruto in a stroke of pure combat genius, tossed a kunai above him in an arc as he all but flew into a jumping knee, just like the knees he had intercepted Mizuki with before. Sasuke however saw it coming and sidestepped while hucking precisely in Naruto's exposed solar plexus. The Uchiha was finally surprised when instead of hitting flesh he instead only dispelled a shadow clone, once again obscuring his vision. The kunai was coming down nearby the Uchiha air, and in a plume of smoke, Naruto caught him off guard with a double-fisted overhead strike as his legs spread out. Sasuke only narrowly managed to block the attack by raising his arms and crouching slightly, and Naruto pushed off of his arms front flipping over him and turning back around into a sloppy hook punch. Sasuke would have none of it however, and he managed a strong spinning back kick just as he was struck from behind. The kunai that Naruto had positioned earlier had snuck up on the Uchiha while he was in the middle of kicking the other clone out of existence, leaping into a knee strike and Superman-type punch all at once. It certainly wasn't the most graceful, shinobi-like attack he could have used from a blind spot, but that didn't mean that Sasuke didn't feel it. The knee hit his lower back hard on the side as Sasuke turned his head surprised, and the punch smashed right into the side of his head, sending him to the ground. The Uchiha was so shocked that his Sharingan actually evolved from the blow, and he now sported 2 Tomo in each of his red eyes. "Don't underestimate me," Naruto declared with his fists balled. Trembling in anger as he rose his red eyes were covered by shadows as his head was tilted down, and in a dark tone Sasuke told him. "I see. Just don't let it get to your head. Naruto." The blonde was caught off guard by the small bit of respect he had just received, and he didn't even see Sasuke's next movement. It was as if the Uchiha had become 3 times faster, and the kick Naruto received was hard enough to even make his real self flinch back in his apartment. Still skimming through the reading material he now had at his home, Naruto's eyes widened in confusion at the memories from Training Ground 7 until he realized exactly what it all meant. He remembered what happened to his clone, from the crow idea to the kunai clone trick to Sasuke showing him just a hint of acknowledgement before demolishing him with that kick. The Uchiha was certainly more skilled than he was, although he would never say it aloud, but if he had been serious, that blow he landed would have killed the Avenger. His clone seemed to be nearly a perfect jutsu, now that he thought about it, as they could help him learn these books better, be sparring partners, run errands, make trap setting far more deadly, be decoys, and even help him escape if he really needed to. With the transformation jutsu, he could probably be the best spy around, as the crows would let him travel a lot faster and discreetly as well. Hell, he wouldn't even have to deal with the shops overcharging him anymore, which would be invaluable in the long run. Too excited to be put down because of Sasuke's shitty attitude, the blonde could only say one thing. Well, scream one thing. Hell yeah. Banzai. After striking a weird pose as if trying to catch something that fell from the sky while leaning to the side, the blonde was sobered up when another thought crossed his mind. Wait. Where am I gonna train? Normally a training ground would be more than suitable for him, but since he wanted to keep his secrets guarded, the Uzumaki was faced with a dilemma. Thankfully though, after a glance of the pile of Ryo, he now had his answer was found. Channeling a nice amount of chakra, the boy sent the scouts out to find what had come to mind to solve his newfound problem, and also read everything he now had while he went to Training Ground 7. A few hours later. Happily leaving the training ground after concealing himself for so long to avoid Sasuke while he planned, Naruto could only thank Kami that Kakashi decided to abstain from training for about a week while everyone got a chance to recover. Since Jiji had given them all A rank mission pay because of the danger that involved their first C rank, Kakashi had figured Naruto wouldn't need the money, which is why he didn't even have them do any D ranks. Perfect. His clones had already found what they sought when he created them, a new living area. To be more detailed, he had found 3 houses right next to each other that were all vacant. Normally such a thing would be hard to find, and Naruto only managed it because of where the properties were situated. Just outside the Uchiha compound. Konoha had long had a rumor that ghosts resided there, and even though Naruto had an irrational fear of ghosts, he swallowed it because of necessity. The property in the middle would be his new domain, and the other 2 were bought to make sure he'd have plenty of privacy, and also space. They all had large backyards, a little smaller than football fields, with plenty of tall trees interspersed in different places. It helped that they were all fairly luxurious and well kept, or at the very least they shitted on his small apartment. The price he got them for was also a steal because of the lowering property value, and so the future Hokage didn't even make much of a dent in the money he now had. He would still be careful with his spending though, if only out of respect for Zabuza, and also because of his experience in living with very little to spend. The middle house would be furnished however, and he now had transformed clones out and about buying couches, tables, paintings, and every other thing he had never been able to acquire with his meager income. He wanted to live with style from now on, and he had a way to do it, so he did it. He'd even finally have a flat screen and a new Tempur-Pedic king-size bed by the day's end. The blonde didn't even acknowledge Sasuke or ask Sakura out before bolting away, leaving an agitated Sasuke to reject Sakura's advance once again. He wanted to get home as fast as he could to dispel his study clones and grab his scrolls, and the only things he would be taking to his new home would be his plants, his nightcap, and frog pajamas he had received from someone as a present on one of his more horrible birthdays. Everything else would be left, and he'd also be leaving a decoy clone there daily to make sure everyone still thought he lived there. It wasn't a secret where the Jinchuriki laid his head at, and that had also often resulted in his home being vandalized by a few of the Boulder Leaf villagers. No more. Now. He'd live where no one could find him, and he'd always be sure to cover his trail with transformations to keep it that way. 2 hours later. Oh. My aching head. As Naruto finally woke up after dispelling all his clones at once, the blonde made a mental note to never do it again. It was like getting hit with 20 flashbacks at once, and the rush of information was enough to nearly put the boy in a coma. He felt like he had been clubbed by Sakura 5 times at once, which was a terrifying thought. After picking himself up off the floor, Naruto began trying to sift through. He also learned a little about poisons, and apparently Haku had favored monkshood, which was both pretty and highly poisonous. Remembering hearing Ino brag about the flower shop her family owned and how she earned money for new clothes, the blonde decided to go and see if he could buy some later. The snow leopard Taijutsu mainly focused on stealth and speed, which was why there were no kata for Naruto to try and learn. Instead, the illustrations all showed various attacks as related to the enemy's position, and it held side notes on everything shown to give examples of what principles were being followed. A good example of this was a picture that showed a ninja crouched down and leaning forward under an opponent striking horizontally. The ninja crouching was stabbing a needle in the enemy's leg, directly in the tendon, so as to hamper movement. Then the next illustration showed the crouched ninja rising and spinning behind the enemy, grasping the neck or stabbing the other senbon into the exposed neck or the base of the skull. The style seemed highly geared toward shuriken jutsu, and that was something that Naruto definitely sucked at. It would be even worse with needles, as the boy found out while trying to stick a few into his wall from short distance. They just bounced off, and the other problem was the fact that Naruto couldn't even get 3 needles into each hand. He had no idea how Haku had managed to do so as fast as she did, and it looked like things weren't going to be as easy as he thought they would be because of shadow clones. Leaving his apartment in a rush, the blonde left to his new home contemplating about the issue the entire way there. After making it to his new home in the same disguise he used before to buy the home, he dropped the transformation in the middle of his newly furnished living room, amazed that things had improved so quickly for him. He now had 3 houses, millions of ryo, new clothes, weapons, knowledge of his clan, justice, and even bingo books to learn about other missing nin. Shit, he even had a lead on someone who would definitely help the Kiri takeover, Mate Terumi. Plopping down on his new leather couch as he remembered that his clones were handling all the utility bills, he didn't really pay much attention to all his new possessions and decor, but instead still thought about the snow leopard Taijutsu and the Kubikirabacho. The huge Zanbato would be impossible for him to wield because he could barely lift it, let alone swing it. The senbon needles would be very difficult to use like Haku did, especially with 3 in each hand between his fingers. Haku didn't even pull them out from anywhere, since she just formed them from ice already in her hands. He mused he could try sealing to solve that problem, or maybe he could even try and learn to use ice techniques. There was also the possibility of using shadow clones to transform into senbon. The main problem was that he had no idea how to use ice techniques, despite the fact that it was mentioned that Haku mixed up water and wind chakra to make the element. He hadn't even known about elemental chakra a few hours ago. He just thought you could do awesome stuff if you learned the jutsu. Apparently he was wrong. Since he had a week off, he'd just have to train himself into the ground like he had done for so long, except now he had material to study instead of just improvising. He'd need to strength train in order to use Zabuza's blade, and he could handle that personally, since he didn't think his clones doing strength training would accomplish anything. They definitely could help him learn Taijutsu, ninjutsu, and study though. Walking out to his backyard and examining the scenery, Naruto let out a sigh of contentment and thanked Zabuza for everything. He wouldn't be failing in his mission, and he knew the longer it took, then the more people like him and Haku would die for no good reason. He noticed one thing about his new housing though, and if he wanted to be able to train in his yard, it'd have to be rectified as soon as possible. There was no water whatsoever, unless you counted the faucet for the hose on his cozy patio. Maybe he could change that. He did have the ryo after all. A little later, Yamanaka Flower SHOP. While he had a few clones that were currently digging a very large hole in his new backyard, Naruto decided to go to the Yamanaka Flower shop and see if he could score some MONKSHOODAKA Wolfbane. He honestly wasn't the type to use poison in battle normally, but something that Haku had written stuck firmly to him and ingrained itself in his beliefs. You use everything at your disposal to get the mission finished. It could probably cover a broad scope of things that pertains to life in general, and Naruto saw that many of the principle Haku spoke of follows along those lines. Your disposition in battle should be the same as your everyday life. That's why neither Haku nor Zabuza took an actual combat stance when they fought. They just stood normally. It was actually quite scary when Naruto thought about it. He could just if you saw a person take an obvious wrestling stance by squatting low with open hands, it'd be safe to assume that they utilized grappling technique. If someone squared up with you and lifted up their clenched fists while tucking their chin, it would be safe to say they used a striking method like boxing. But when someone just stood, it didn't show anything. You wouldn't know how they would come at you until they did, and that concept greatly appealed to the blonde ninja. Unpredictability. Ino certainly seemed to be surprised seeing the familiar form of the village prankster and class clown visit her family's shop, if the wide-eyed expression was anything to go by. "Then Naruto, is that you? Like my new look, Ino-chan?" he asked her, rubbing the back of his head and smiling at her in his trademark foxy manner. The Yamanaka heiress couldn't hide her blush as she roamed Naruto's body checking out his new digs. It wasn't anything extravagant, just some typical black Hanbu type gear that was just a little baggy on his frame. He also had some high-quality steel-soled black sandals, and to finish it, he wore a large white hooded cloak with long sleeves that was reversible. The other side was all black, and there were seals on it that prevented it from getting worn or dirty. Naruto figured it belonged to Haku, and although he didn't get off wearing women's clothing, the Anbu gear was unisex, and the cloak was a cloak. Some part of him still wanted to stand out a bit despite his recent improvements in common sense, and as a result there were orange flames that went along the bottom of the cloak. He was actually using a transformation for the flames, and he thought they made him look badass to the point of wanting to retake his registration photo. He'd have to ask the old man later. Wow. You look great. It suits you and I like the thing you're doing with the headband. Naruto could only blush and fiddle with the mentioned cloth that was to the side exactly like Zabuza had his. He had thought it looked so cool even during the wave mission, and Zabuza was the only shinobi he had ever seen to wear it in such a fashion. In a way it kind of shouted, "Fuck protecting my forehead cause you'll be dead before you even realize it." At least Haku had said something like that in an interesting entry after she had a long talk with Zabuza. "Thanks Ino-chan. So. How's shinobi life treating you? Shouldn't you be out training or on a mission or something?" The blonde Yamanaka frowned as if she had a bad taste in her mouth upon hearing his question, and she quickly replied. "Yeah, if I wasn't in a team with a bunch of lazy asses. I mean. All my sensei does is smoke and play shogi with Shikamaru who does nothing but stare at the clouds. And Chaoji is no better munching away at his potato chips like some sort of junkie. I hate to admit it, but I'd kill to switch spots with Sakura. Yeah, that does sound like it'd suck. Hey, I know. I've been training a lot and I could use a partner databeo. What do you say?" The boy asked, excited at the prospect of making a friend out of Ino. He didn't really know her much, but from what he saw she was energetic and upbeat like he was, if a bit bossy. Well. Super bossy. But how could he complain? "Partner. My oh my Naruto, I didn't know you thought of me like that, already asking me out on dates and to be your partner." She playfully teased, giving him a look that caused his stomach to flip and his face to flush. He would have given anything to have Sakura look at him like that. Waving his hands in desperation and sputtering out his answer, he yelled. What I didn't mean. I mean I was just saying." Cutting him off with laughter that made him more than a bit confused, Ino told him. "I was just messing with you, Naruto. I still like Sasuke, you know, and I won't let forehead fat beat me in winning him over. But I'd be happy to train with you sometime since I don't have anything better to do anyways." Not even being put down by the fact that she liked Sasuke and basically said if she had something to do she wouldn't join him, Naruto smoked brightly, saying. "Great. I can't wait, databeo. By the way, Sasuke hasn't even acted like Sakura exists honestly, and after our last mission, which was insane, he'd gotten even worse. I don't think he likes anyone at all. The team." Outing at Naruto's insult of her crush, she didn't say anything about it, but instead questioned him about what he meant. "What do you mean? What mission?" Naruto then gave her the rundown of everything that happened in Wave, except for his relationship with Haku and Zabuza. He also told the amazed girl about what happened when they returned and how Sasuke unlocked the Sharingan and saw him as a rival. A bitter rival. Wow, he must be so strong to fight missing nin like that. And he unlocked his Sharingan, that's so cool. I bet he looks so hot with red eyes. Naruto, nearly vomiting on the spot from Ino's powerful fangirlism, decided to move along before his ramen found its way out of his stomach. Hell, the thought of Sasuke being hot nearly made him hurl up something from deep within his intestines. Something undigested and putrid. It was time for him to go. Ino-chan, I was wondering if you guys sold any monkshood here. I was trying to get a whole lot of it to plant around my yard, and I also wanted any books you have on growing plants too. The girl looked truly surprised by his requests, but she seemed to understand why he would want the poisonous flower that was her favorite because of its color. After calming a little, she told him. "You're damned right, we got it, it's my favorite after all. Just come by tomorrow and I'll have some grown a little for you. It takes a little time, but I can handle it. There are books over there if you want to check 'em all out." Looking confused and more than a little curious, Naruto asked her. "Wait. What do you mean you'll have enough grown a little tomorrow? Shouldn't it take at least a couple weeks?" Smirking at Naruto's confusion and feeling a bit elated due to hearing about Sasuke rejecting Sakura, Ino decided to inform Naruto a little bit about Yamanaka-style horticulture. "Well, normally. But plants use energy from the sun to grow. We feed our plants chakra-rich water and it speeds everything up. It takes a lot of chakra, but I'll have some sprouts for you before you know it." As an image of the first Hokage flashed in his mind's eye, Naruto started creeping Ino out because of the shit-eating grin he got as he turned and went to search for books. The day after leaving Yamanaka Flower Shop, Naruto could be found doing a multitude of exercises in his revamped training regimen. He honestly just made up some new exercises by combining a few of them in different ways, and so he was now doing crunches while standing on the side of a tree in his backyard. The other thing he had been doing was squats while lifting the Kubikirabacho above his head. He figured that the best way to get used to it was just to train with it all the time, and so he had been up and at it since early in the morning. His clones from the previous day had finished the hole for the in-ground for the pool he was trying to make himself to practice in, and so he was now waiting for some clones to return with supplies and instructions from the pool supply store on the other side of the village. He had seen a few pools around before and he thought they were made of concrete whenever he gate hopped and snuck in when no one was around. It seemed being such a troublemaker had benefits after all. He still hadn't tried all of his jutsu yet and he was looking forward to it after his clones that were scattered about finished their task. A fence. A huge fence of epic proportions. His trip to Yamanaka flower shop had resulted in more than just flowers and poison, as the blonde had inadvertently stumbled upon his first jutsu that he created. After asking Ino about different types of plants, the conversation had eventually shifted to bamboo, which Naruto was absolutely fascinated with to the point of focusing completely on it. While he had seen various architecture that utilized the hardy grass, he didn't know just how perfect it really was. On one hand, bamboo even without chakra boosting its growth could grow 3 feet a day. 3 freaking feet. When you considered the fact that it was nearly as strong as steel like Ino said, and a deadly cyanide was produced when its cells were destroyed, then it was just great. While Naruto didn't understand much about cells and things like that yet, Ino had dumbed it down enough for him to understand that they were like building blocks, so if you hurt the bamboo, then a toxin would be produced. The ideas had exploded from Naruto like diarrhea when he drank that spoiled milk a few times, and his unconventional thinking had already thought of so many uses for it. First off was a tall fence around his yard, tall and thick enough that no one could see inside unless they trespass. The second idea was traps. If he could drop seeds on the ground during battle and grow them out quickly, he may be able to use an attack like Haku used when she made ice spikes shoot from below. It could be used in direct attack too, if he could manipulate how the bamboo grew, so that it shot at an angle that would skewer the enemy. Lastly, it would definitely be a great defense if it was as strong as steel. He could just imagine the look on Sasuke's face when he shot a fireball just to have it blocked by Naruto's bamboo barrier. The large flaw he saw was that he needed some water to do it, but he found out that his chakra was so powerful that bamboo grew almost immediately even from seeds. It would sprout at a slightly tilted angle and would stretch beyond his height within a second and keeping going. He knew it wasn't Mokuton, the first Hokage's famous bloodline that allowed to trees and plant life to be grown. This was just him growing a plant from a seed and manipulating it a little with his chakra, an energy source that was more concentrated than the sun's rays. He started to bend it with his chakra and he found that it was actually easier for him to do than sticking a leaf to himself. Kakashi said that Naruto had more chakra than anyone in the village, and seeing that the larger techniques were easier than the small ones, Naruto knew he needed to work more on his control. It was fortunate that a few chakra control exercises that Haku had written about mentioned water walking, along with Haku's water and wind manipulation. When his pool was made, he'd be working on standing in water using his chakra until he could do it on the tips of his toes. Then after that, he'd have to try skating on his toes while using chakra to increase his speed and fluidity in movement. It was actually a part of the footwork of the snow leopard style to distribute weight in every part of his feet in differing methods for adaptability and transition and balance. Standing on one leg and doing squats was an important exercise to do, and spinning while moving the body like it was water was too. Crashing waves should be envisioned, as if you were the ocean itself when you twisted and bursted forward. Haku also wrote of something that blew Naruto's mind, to the point where he could integrate it into everything he did. It was like the figure 8, but you should envision it overlapping with itself in every angle. It was like an 8 that was crossed over itself 4 times like X and plus. Then there was another that was 3-dimensional, as in coming toward you and going away from you with dips and rises. It was supposed to let you come from limitless angles once you learned to link attacks together so that you could do multiple X cutting attacks at once. Not just cuts, but stabs could also come from these angles, and this left Naruto with a lot to build off of. Haku didn't really use a set style, she kept developing it using techniques that worked for her, something that Zabuza encouraged. After a little reflection, Naruto knew that he would do the same thing, especially considering the Sharingan. If Sasuke somehow stole his moves later with the oh-so-great Sharingan, then he at least wanted to be able to kick his ass and switch styles. He was trying to figure out how to ask Kakashi-sensei to help him without getting rejected though. His shuriken jutsu just needed work, flat out. Still, the blonde was making phenomenal improvements, especially considering that he could now do the shadow clone jutsu with a half seal. The problem was that it took him about 4 seconds to gather and focus the chakra, and if he released it wrong, then if he tries to make 5 clones he'd only get 2. At least he could do it, and that was pretty much thanks to the dozen-plus clones he had training the technique. Going through a series of attacks on his clones who were moving slowly, he was sure to move precisely so he could make sure he was striking the right targets. If you held a senbon in your hand and let the tips come out of both ends, then you could attack with the 2 points in the same swing. This was for efficiency, so that in essence you were supposed to attack and defend simultaneously while pushing forward and around the enemy. Once a weak point was identified based on positioning, you could then attack or feint using the legs to attack while using the needles as projectiles. It was basically an aggressive counter-attacking style, which was a perfect match for the Uzumaki. He had been purely attack and dodge before, but now he was learning much more, as Haku believed defense was more important while learning than attack. Defense, however, was not sufficient in battle, and attack was the only thing that would result in victory. Lunging forward and to the side while grabbing a straight punch with his hand and moving beside his clone, he stabbed it in the temple with a senbon as he spun around it, continuing forward. It definitely helped that Heika style didn't take a stance, and because of that Naruto didn't waste time making mistakes, especially with how the pictures were arranged. Because they were so simple, he just started off slow and sped up with his other clones, doing the other sequences that were shown. Because of the infinite SIGN8 handwork application, he knew that every strike he threw should actually be multiple attacks that could change course mid-swing to counter. It would make the style basically unstoppable because of its counter-attacking nature, quick strikes, and unlimited adaptability. Haku likened herself to a sword, much like Zabuza's Zanbato, which would rebuild itself with iron from the blood it drew. Naruto was amazed that Kubikirabacho had this ability, and although he was saddened that Zabuza didn't really leave behind any writings, he was still happy about the jutsu. As far as likening oneself to a sword, this seemed to be an important aspect of Heika's jutsu, since her movements could also be used with swords. You were supposed to see your body as moving with the swiftness of a sword, decisive and true. You were supposed to be like water flowing and being able to change. Change was life. Stillness was death. Flexibility was life. Rigidness was death. Just as much as having the mindset of be like an ocean was, the mindset of being a sword was there as well. Naruto could appreciate this concept and took it to heart. After a while of various taijutsu training using groups of clones that would disappear before long, Naruto knew that he would get good really soon if he kept it up. Deciding to practice his jutsu scrolls as he saw the last of the bamboo he was growing as a fence come to life before him, he grabbed the scrolls and made his way to an emptier part of the yard. The first thing he'd be doing was the hidden mist jutsu and the shunshin, although the water dragon had him damn near drooling since the other day. He was going to really focus on water manipulation and shadow clones though, since that would be central to the style he was creating. If he had his way, he'd have the best assassination style that ever existed before long. Besides the shunshin, mist, and water dragon jutsu was the water encampment wall, great waterfall, water prison, and water bullet jutsu, which were all Zabuza's. He could only tell because the rough handwriting and the lack of detail, and he figured it was because he gave it to Haku that he wrote it in the first place. There was also the jutsu that Haku created, which showed her mastery of water manipulation because of its use of a single hand seal. It actually combined the hidden mist jutsu and a theory she made when she heard of the second Hokage, who was famous for water techniques. She thought that she could start using the hidden mist jutsu to train and after a while be able to concentrate the mist closer along the ground. Then she could multiply its mass with her water chakra, which was a basis for jutsu period, and be a key to collect water from moisture in the air like Tobirama Senju. What was ironic was that Naruto ended up being inspired by Hashirama the other day, and now he technically had a way to use their jutsu, even if not as skilled as them. Especially the first, since he couldn't create plant life. He would just use bamboo-inspired moves that would only be a little similar to wood release. The jutsu Haku created from the hidden mist technique was the 1,000 water needles of death, which Naruto recalled seeing from the distance during the bridge battle. It was the jutsu that also used her principle of simultaneously attacking and defending, since she would grab the arm suppressing the weapon, stomp the foot disabling movement, and sending the needles from every direction blocking any escape, considering you could move with broken toes. She also had an ice version, in which she used wind jutsu to freeze the water needles. While he felt it would probably take a long time to accomplish, Naruto had a feeling that he could do the ice version if he trained hard enough, as just a little earlier he was shocked to learn he had a wind and water nature just like Haku. He literally couldn't ask for anything better, especially considering Haku had a basic wind manipulation method and a slightly harder one. You first had to cut a leaf with your chakra by grinding it against itself in a thin line. After you cut the leaf you were supposed to cut into a mud cake and then rock eventually. Naruto also considered that after rock you could try steel, but he'd have to see about that later. He had clones attempting to cut the leaf, and he also had a clone in his kitchen using the sink to saturate the water inside with chakra. Then he'd have to try moving it around in different ways and eventually be able to hold an orb around his hand. This was also the basis of the water prison, although the orb was a lot bigger and you were supposed to force water down the enemy's lungs, although if they used their chakra to block it, you would have trouble drowning them. He even had a clone in the bathroom attempting to saturate the water in the tub through his feet, which was very difficult. That would be key in learning the water dragon and the great waterfall. Naruto also had an interesting idea with seals concerning water, and so the blonde found he had his hands full. Good thing he had clones. The first attempts were all busts. The hidden miss jutsu didn't look very hard, but the lack of control Naruto had really made it difficult for him. He quickly decided to make clones and have them to train, however, because of an interesting thought that popped into his mind. Kakashi said Naruto had more chakra than the Hokage, who was the strongest in the village. He also said the smaller your chakra, the easier to control, which explained Sakura's ease in completing tree walking. Since his shadow clone split his chakra up, then he should be able to learn the jutsu quicker, because his clones would have less chakra to have to guide. He couldn't find any flaws in the logic, and so he kept on pushing himself in his strength training. Lifting the Zanbato above his head would probably be hardest, but then again he felt swinging it and then reversing its path by swinging it back the other way would be really difficult too. He didn't have any kata to use, or even techniques from Zabuza. He did remember when Zabuza threw the sword at them, nearly decapitating his whole team and Tazuna at the same time. He also recalled the spinning back kick that he caught Kakashi-sensei with, as well as the way he stood behind his sword and guarded sometimes. That was all he had to go by, however, but he had a hunch that using Snow Leopard style would work fine with a few tweaks. He just needed to get stronger. A few hours later. Knock knock knock. Lifting his head from the book, blushing as he opened the door, the transformed Lynette was taken back by who was standing there. While he had filed for D-rank mission involving helping construction of his pool, he didn't expect the workers to be people he knew. Standing before the familiar faces of Team 8, which consisted of Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburam, and their Jonin instructor Kurenai Yuhi. He had recognized Kiba first, however, as the dog Shinobi had definitely had the most contact with him of the group. Kiba and his nin dog Akamara seemed to notice Naruto as well, both of them sniffing the peculiar scent of ramen and fox that they'd recognize anywhere. Shino also seemed to take notice, his kikai buzzing without constraint because of the familiar powerful chakra they felt. Kiba, Shino, what is it? Kurenai instantly noticed her team's behavior as their employer opened the door and looked on in surprise. While she could feel the faint hint of chakra usage coming from the girl, she knew for a fact that no Jinjutsu was being used and she was ready for anything. Just what the hell are you playing at, Naruto? This had better not be a prank. Kiba yelled at the Uzumaki, pointing an accusing finger at him. Hinata's eyes seemed to widen as a blush was instantly on her face hearing her crush's name spoken, and she looked confused until she activated her Byakugan unconsciously out of excitement to see if it was true. Then Naruto-kun. She promptly passed out. Hinata Kiba shouted, worried about his teammate's safety. Naruto was about to just close the door and say screw it when Kurenai stopped it with her foot, saying, "So. You're that Naruto Uzumaki I've heard about. Just why are you here and why are you transformed?" Sighing as Kiba turned to him looking very angry, the Inuzuka cut him off, yelling. "And what did you do to Hinata?" "Hold on a second. I didn't do anything and this is my house. I'm in disguise because I'm a ninja and I don't want anyone to know where I live. So please just keep it down. Is that a problem?" Even Shino was surprised by the logical explanation the class clown offered, and he, Bug User and Kurenai both answered at the same time, saying, "There is no problem with that logic. It is fine. I understand, I use misdirection myself so I get it." Looking at the group with relief as Kiba shook Hinata awake, Naruto opened his door up wide and told them. "Thanks. You guys can come in if you want and I'll tell you about what I need done while I make us some tea or something. Come on." As the Jinchuriki-led teammate a little bit aggravated because of being identified so soon, he pointed to his new couch as they took on the decor, saying, "Feel free to sit while I make some tea and I'll tell you what I want you to do." The blonde's transformation suddenly dropped, allowing teammate to lay eyes on his true form for the first time in a while. What happened next was actually pretty interesting, even more so than Shino would have thought possible. Kurenai-sensei went completely red upon laying eyes on Naruto, and Hinata actually drooled a little before suddenly collapsing in a familiar pool of blood that shot from her nose like a "What the?" Hinata's a pervert, wait. That means. Naruto could finally connect the dots now that he could see the correlation between how the Hokage turned red and exploded with blood shooting from his nostrils and Hinata doing the same. As soon as she saw him. That why she always passed out when he was around. She was a pervert. For him. Naruto truly couldn't comprehend such a thing, as it was a new occurrence that he never would have thought possible. Hinata wasn't really weird, she was just some sort of shy pervert for him. And as Naruto looked at the beautiful form of her sensei, he saw that she was red in the face too, with her mouth slightly slack. A small dribble of drool could barely be seen on the corner of her mouth and her eyes were glazed in nostalgia mixed with lust. No one knew about her lifetime crush on the fourth Hokage, the man who she had a thing for ever since she was a little girl, first learning to be a kunoichi. She had just been jailbait then, and Minato Namikaze never really reacted to her attraction to him the few times she saw him in person. Naruto was exactly like the fourth as far as his features went. The whisker marks were different though, and gave him a cute and unique look. His hair was nearly the same, his eyes were a different blue than the cold calculating eyes of Minato. All in all, while very similar, Naruto had a more rough and tumble look about him, and she thought that while the fourth was more stunning, Naruto was very attractive himself. She could only just stare at him as her mind slowly rebooted as Kiba and Shino observed everything. She was busy imagining how he'd look after a few more years, and the images her creative mind were conjuring were enough to make her a little bit wet below the belt. Anyway. I need you to help me place cinder block around the inside of this hole I made in the backyard, and then we'll have to use some cement to line it evenly. At least that's what the pool guy said. I just wanted to be sure I followed the instructions right because this is very important to me. That's why I asked for someone help. He explained as he placed his hand in a half-ram seal and used the shadow clone jutsu to make them some tea and make sure the supplies were ready. Kurenai just nodded dumbly, not trusting herself to speak, and since Shino nodded and Hinata was unconscious, Kiba spoke up looking at Naruto with a peculiar expression. How did you do that, dude? What? Naruto asked, oblivious of what Kiba spoke of. Kiba had definitely seen the way Kurenai looked at Naruto just now, and although he instantly went into denial because of her attraction to the dead last, he felt the need to assert himself in front of her. How'd you make real clones, with a half seal? You were the dead last in the academy, was that all just an act? Naruto, looking taken aback, not fully realizing how difficult the feat really was, schooled himself and decided he'd look cool and go with the flow. Maybe I was. I mean, I am a ninja and ninja have their secrets, right? I'll just tell you to never underestimate me, Dadabeo. Oh yeah, well, even if you were faking that doesn't mean you can take me. Kiba declared, trying his best to radiate dominance and make Naruto intimidated. Kiba. Stop being rude to our client, this isn't the time and place for that. We're on a mission, remember, Kurenai scolded the Inyazuka, who was busy puffing his chest out and staring down Naruto. No, it's alright, Kurenai Haim, if it's a fight he wants, then you guys should come train with me and Ino in a few days. I'll show you just how strong I really am, Kiba. Believe it. Hey, don't call her that, dead last. Kiba shouted, getting angry as Kurenai blushed again from his unintended compliment. Naruto had never seen such a beautiful woman as Kurenai, and he hadn't even realized he had been comparing her beauty to the famous actor Yuki until he sorry Kurenai, I didn't mean to disrespect you or anything. It's just you're like a princess when I look at you, and I just said what I thought. Kurenai, for all her experience as a renowned expert kunoichi, just couldn't stay her usual stoic self around Naruto, her fangirl days crashing back into her full blast because of his resemblance to the fourth. It didn't help that Naruto had just called her princess. Twice. And the thing about it was that he said it without thinking. The Jinjutsu expert almost wanted to jump the Uzumaki in a very Anko-like manner, but she managed to barely contain the blush and warm feeling that was spreading in her core. She needed to get a grip, she was 10 years his senior for Kama's sake. For some odd reason that kind of turned her on even more, and she had to turn away from Naruto to give her reply. It's fine, Naruto-kun. Thank you for the compliment. So. She had to thank Kami when the kettle began to whistle, distracting Naruto's eyes from roaming her body like he was doing. She saw how he looked at her, gazing at her hair, eyes, and curves that many men in the village likened to that of a supermodel. It was refreshing to see a man appreciate something other than her breasts and ass, and Naruto had spent most of his staring looking at her eyes and face as if in a daze. Yep, and I need it finished ASAP. I can supply plenty of clones though, so you guys don't need to work unless you want to. I just wanted to make sure it gets done right, you know. He answered cheerfully, going and preparing the tea in the new tea set he had bought. Sounds fine. Hinata can even use her Byakugan to make sure everything is even. We can start when Hinata wakes up, okay? Great. Oh, what's a Byakugan, by the way? After Kurenai explained about the Hyuga clan Kekai Genkai that allowed 360-degree vision and telescopic sight, along with chakra vision, Naruto looked fascinated at the prospect and wondered how effective their gentle fist really was. They ended up discussing many of the other clans of the Leaf, with Kiba boasting about the Inyazuka and Shino, only giving a very short explanation of the Aburum, in which he just said, "We use our parasitic insects for combat and espionage." Naruto, while a little bit weary of a bug hive inside of his home, still thought it was kind of cool, and voicing his opinion to Shino, he managed to sort of make a friend out of him. Shino even invited him to join him in searching for new insects, and Naruto, being Naruto, just couldn't refuse. Naruto eventually asked Kurenai if she was from the Uchiha clan because of her eyes and hair, and he was a bit surprised at the annoyance he saw in her features as she gave him an answer. No, Naruto-kun, I am not an Uchiha. Their clan was massacred years ago, and now your teammate Sasuke Uchiha is the last remaining Uchiha in the village. What happened? Where am I? Hinata moaned as her eyes fluttered open and she regained her bearings. Naruto didn't know exactly what to do and so opted to just give everyone their tea and go outside, telling them he was ready when they were. Truth be told, he was exceedingly nervous around Kurenai and Hinata as he was staring to crush on Kurenai and Hinata was apparently a pervert for him. What was he supposed to do? A few images of fondling Hinata and Kurenai at the same time while they kissed each other materialized in his head and Naruto knew one thing for sure. Crushing down his perverted thoughts, he knew this was gonna be a long day. 4 days later. It was early afternoon at Training Ground 8 and Naruto Uzumaki was waiting ecstatic at the chance to train with his new friends. He had been training 24/7 because of his clones working around the clock and even now his large square in-ground pool was full of training doppelganger. Well, it was only 5 feet deep, that was actually perfect for what he was using it for and it wasn't swimming. During the last 4 days, he had learned the Shunshin, Hidden Mist, and Water Bullet Jutsu, but the other law were significantly more difficult. The Water Dragon actually took like 40 seals to complete and Naruto hadn't even memorized them all yet to even try it. His water walking hadn't improved like he thought it would, but at least he was staring to get a foothold before he fell inside. Or at least his clones did. Naruto had been training his strength by wielding the Kubikirabacho and his speed by practicing Shunshin. The body flicker didn't have an explanation for its normal usage, as Zabuza must have just explained it to Haku and gave her the scroll with the instructions. As a result, Naruto didn't know that it was normally used just for simple transport and rarely in combat. As a result, he had been using the technique as much as possible with the intent to use it in combat, which had led to more than a few hard impacts with the trees in his yard and the bamboo surrounding it. Still though, the fact that he could now disappear and reappear in a burst of speed greatly increased his ability, although his vision lagged and it took a moment to coordinate himself to attack. His taijutsu also was better after his studies, and since Kurenai had gotten him interested in Genjutsu, he had bought a book on Genjutsu theory that was also being studied. He had been so busy that he hadn't even read through the bingo books yet, instead choosing to use all his clones to make himself better. It was only today that he had decided to crack the books open, and he had a clone going through all the issues that Zabuza had been collecting for Kami knows how long. As everyone began to show up one by one, Naruto could only grin thinking about how he would show them just who would be the 5th Hokage. Practically bouncing around in excitement as Shino arrived, Naruto greeted his bug-using friend loudly with a smile and a wave that was returned by a simple nod and stoic good afternoon. The two of them barely got to talk about fire ants which Naruto brought up when Hinata appeared, and even though Naruto was at a loss for what to do about her, he gave her a warm greeting like he had just given Shino. And she slumped to the ground again. It was actually much worse than it had previously been. Ever since Naruto had changed outfit, she couldn't even be conscious in his immediate vicinity. A minute later, Kurenai appeared in a swirl of leaves greeting the two genin present and automatically went to check on Hinata. The only reason Naruto hadn't was because Shino had assured him her vitals were fine and he didn't want to get close to the girl he had been having dirty thoughts about. Kiba and Ino seemed to arrive at nearly the same time a couple minutes later, and so now that everyone had arrived, it was time to get things underway. Hinata started coming to after a while, and Kurenai, seeing her young charge awakening, finally joined the group of genin before anything started prematurely. Kiba and Naruto were already butting heads, and it didn't help that Ino had jumped in taking Naruto's side and calling Kiba dog breath. After Kiba responded saying she was a useless fangirl, Kurenai sighed but still addressed them all saying, "Alright, settle down." Since Kiba challenged Naruto and he accepted, I suppose we can start with sparring so that they can test each other's strength. The only rules I'll place are no crippling and fatal attacks, so jutsu are allowed but only non-lethal force, understood? Naruto, giving a nod with a look of determination, began walking to the center of the training ground at a quick pace with Kiba doing the same, and the Inyazuka was sizing the blonde up the entirety of the short walk with a scowl of distaste. He was looking forward to knocking Kiba down a few pegs, and even though Kurenai was Kiba's sensei, she found herself a little thrilled to see what Naruto was capable of. Ino was loudly cheering the blonde on, since she wanted to see Kiba get his ass whooped too, and Shino was watching their every movement with an analytical eye, was curious of Naruto's true skill. He himself had held back a lot during the academy, to the point where he was quite sure he could defeat Sasuke Uchiha, even though no one else knew he could. Hinata was quiet as well, but she was just nervous and hoping that her crush didn't get hurt. "You ready to see who's top dog dead last?" the brazen Inyazuka taunted his rival and stealing Kurenai's heart. "Bring it on, Kiba, but do me a favor and actually be serious. I'll warn you again, don't underestimate me." Naruto shot back with a glare while cracking his knuckles. "Like I need to." In fact, Akamaru, go and watch while I show this loser who's boss," he declared, ordering his nin dog partner to the sideline, who gave a bark in the affirmative. No more words were exchanged as Kiba dropped into his stance by crouching down with his fingers taut, ready to use his claws, bouncing on his toes ready to strike. Naruto just stood normally, although he turned his body to the side so that he was harder to hit in his center line. Haku had repeatedly mentioned this in her Taijutsu writings, since many of the targets she often went for were along the center of the body, where many of the weak points were. After Kurenai gave them the okay to start, Kiba immediately dashed forward, leaping into a few swift claw swipes that came from the side and upward, and Naruto could only sidestep, sending a nicely aimed low side kick that hit him hard in his thigh. Kiba did manage to graze Naruto, however, and the Uzumaki now had a scratch on the side of his neck that was shallow, although there was steel soles in Naruto's sandals, made his kick more effective, and this was seen when Kiba stumbled a bit in pain until he squinted his eyes in anger and began growling. Then the dog boy redoubled his assault, and Naruto was so hard pressed by the unorthodox flip kicks and swipes that all he could do was try and evade them. Kiba certainly wasn't a pushover, and Naruto kind of thought that in some ways he was a better fighter than Sasuke was. While he lacked Sasuke's hard-hitting precision, the Inuzuka attacked with ferocity, speed, and unpredictable movements that linked off of flips and pounces. It was time to step it up. As Kiba launched a sidekick with his upper body and arms close to the ground, Naruto, seeing how the boy slightly overextended himself, managed a weak hook strike with the side of his fist, as if he was holding a senbon. Then he tried to spin around Kiba and grab his throat, but he ended up receiving a powerful kick to his shin when Kiba dropped down and hit him with both of his legs extending outward. Naruto had to grunt in pain as he fell to the ground, but he barely managed to force himself up and fight through the pain in his aching leg when Kiba tried to finish him with a pouncing attack. Rolling and rising at once, the Uzumaki lashed out with a kick before leaping back to regroup, but Kiba swatted it to the side and pressed forward, and Naruto's reflexes were thoroughly tested as he evaded the various swipes that came from insane angles. Now it seemed he didn't have a choice, despite the fact that he wanted to stick to Taijutsu for this fight, but he'd be damned if he lost in front of Kurenai Haim. Kurenai narrowed her eyes at the sloppy flips Naruto used to avoid Kiba while he prepared his jutsu, and she made a mental note to tell him to improve his acrobatics as soon as possible. His movement lacked grace and efficiency, although she did admit that his Taijutsu was alright for a genin. Kiba already displayed low Chunin rank Taijutsu, since he had been training in the Inu style his entire life. Naruto, however, was more like a high-level genin, with hints of Chunin level peeking through every so often, and he knew how to think on his feet. As Naruto landed from his impromptu flip to the side, Kiba changed his movement to chase Naruto down. The Uzumaki had both of his hands in a half seal with a tactic he had made the other day already in mind. As Kiba drew closer and closer, Naruto leapt back, focusing, and just before the Inuzuka landed a powerful downward claw, Naruto just disappeared. Before Kiba knew it, a team of 4 clones was upon him from all sides, and he couldn't defend himself from all the blows as they simultaneously jumped into knee strikes, knocking him down. Everyone was surprised by the outcome, especially Ino, who had begun to shout in glee at seeing the dog breath boy get his block knocked off. Kiba, for all his skill and tenacity, was pretty hurt by the pincer-type maneuver that Naruto hit him with, especially because his body didn't move with the blows since he was caught in the middle. Alright, this match is over. That was very impressive, Naruto. You did well too, Kiba, but you should have been serious from the start instead of blowing him off. You didn't even use your 4 legs technique. Kurenai told the 2 combatants. Naruto beamed at the praise and was ecstatic that he impressed his crush, and Kurenai didn't fail to see the blush that he and his clones had as they gazed at her. Maybe she could offer him a few lessons. Although, Naruto-kun, I have to say, your flipping was horrendous. You really need to work on your acrobatics, but if you want I could give you a few lessons sometime later, okay? She suggested, barely managing to stop herself from blushing because of her hidden agenda. Thanks so much, Kurenai-sensei, I promise I won't waste your time. And I never break a promise, that's my ninja way. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you this new genjutsu I created. I know you're the best in the village, so I want your opinion. Naruto, excited, declared, his blush fading a little as he gave her his trademark foxy smile. Excuse me, Naruto-san, but I would also like to test myself against you before you demonstrate your new technique. Shino cut in just as Kurenai smiled at Naruto and was about to tell him to show her. She wasn't bothered by Shino's interruption, however, as she was actually a little curious about who would win in a spar. That's what I'm talking about, Shino. Let's do it, Dadabayo. Yes, let us. Shino calmly walked to the center of the field while Kiba pulled himself up with a grimace, and Ino asked Hinata who she thought would win between them. Hinata honestly didn't know, but she did inform Ino of Naruto's huge chakra and also of Shino's pure efficiency in his strategy. Naruto hurriedly walked to the center and squared off with Shino, and he found that unlike Kiba, Shino didn't take a stance either. They basically just stood normally across from each other, and somehow Naruto knew he needed to go all out against the Aburam from the get-go. He damn sure didn't want any bugs on him biting and sucking his chakra out. This match will have the same rules as the last. Jutsu allowed, but no deadly force, understood? Kurenai asked as she got ready to give them the okay to begin. After they both nodded, never stopping their staring contest, she gave then the signal to start with a hajime and shunshined away to where the other genin were. The cloud of insects burst from Shino's sleeves, and Naruto actually became a bit nervous as he leapt back, his hands already in half seals. Shino seemed to notice his disposition and decided to launch a little psychological warfare. It would appear that you are afraid of my Kakechu. Why would I think so? Because I can see the fear in your eyes. Just forfeit and I won't have to send them upon you. His menacing and monotonous voice actually did manage to shake Naruto up a little bit, but the Uzumaki schooled himself and instead gave a shit-eating grin as he began going through a few hand seals for the Jinjutsu he created. It was actually inspired by both the hidden miss jutsu and the fact that in an interesting entry where Haku spoke of her training with Zabuza, she mentioned he had a chakra shroud that she could actually see. It was wild and untamed like a demon in physical form, and Zabuza's killing intent seemed to skyrocket, which hampered Heika's thinking to the point where she was easy to defeat. Naruto learned a bit about killing intent surprisingly from the Taijutsu pages he studied, as it was an integral part of silent killing, which was an integral part of the snow leopard Taijutsu style. And so after a little trial and error, he had managed to learn how to manage his spiritual energy by itself, and it only took him imagining the people who used to torment him, hurting the people he cared for. Of course he had to channel a large amount of chakra for more potency, and because of his massive reserves and considerable experience in receiving hatred from others, it wasn't hard to tap into his emotional self, especially with his vivid imagination. Right now he was imagining Kurenai being hurt, and although the anger was somewhat forced, the feeling was real as he thought about what he'd do to the idiot that hurt her. And then it happened. The pressure was unbelievable. While it may have been a little weaker than Zabuza's own massive intent, that didn't mean that any genin or even chunin was ready to handle it. Especially a genin with a hive of insects that were instinctual and affected his disposition. As a blood-red mist surrounded Naruto and he focused his killing intent on Shino, the Aburam actually slumped to the ground trembling while Ino followed suit, along with Hinata, who fainted immediately. Kurenai even developed a light sheen of sweat, but she had felt worse before, and being a Jinjutsu expert, Naruto's was at least mid-Jonin level, and it was very intense at that. Almost like a Kage, but he must not have had much experience using it. Naruto. That's enough. She declared instantly beside him as his eyes widened in fear because of what he had done. He was just trying to cause Shino to panic, he never thought that nearly everyone would collapse. Kiba only barely managed to stay alert, and he was consoling Akamaru, who was whimpering and begging Kiba to protect him. For all his bravado, Kiba knew he was beginning to get weary of the prankster now, who knew what he was capable of. Kurenai. I didn't try to. I'm sorry. I just wanted to see if my new Jinjutsu would work. Her eyes widening, she asked to clarify. That's the Jinjutsu you created, killing intent with that bloody mist to strike fear. I must say that I'm impressed, but I'd advise you not to use it on comrades if you want them to still be your friends, Naruto-kun. A Jonin like me can handle it, but there aren't many genin that would be unaffected by that technique, especially with the intimidation factor from the blood shroud. Nodding with a grave look, Naruto went over to Hinata and Ino because he wasn't sure if Shino's insects would attack him if he got close now. Kurenai, seeing this, went to check on Shino, more than prepared to evade his Kakechu, and after about a minute of hovering over Ino while Kiba petted Akamaru, he finally saw her begun to wake up looking confused before a look of terror flashed in her eyes. Then Naruto, what was that? Ino-chan, I'm so sorry, that was a Jinjutsu I made to make people afraid. I didn't know it'd affect everything around me cause I practiced by myself and my clones never seemed to be that bad off. I guess it's because of my mission to Wave and that ninja Zabuza I told you about. Kurenai, perking up hearing his explanation as Shino woke up, decided to ask him about his mission. Zabuza Mamachi, demon of the hidden mist. You mean you've heard of him, Kurenai-sensei? Naruto asked as Hinata began to stir. Have I heard of him? That man is practically a legend. He slaughtered his entire graduating class before he even entered the academy. To me that's like Itachi Uchiha single-handedly murdering the entire Uchiha clan. For you to have faced him in combat and still be breathing is a blessing, Naruto-kun. The Uzumaki could only nod, knowing full well why Zabuza actually killed everyone that fateful graduation, as his older sister had been raped and slaughtered by the boy she thought loved her. If Haku hadn't spoken of it because it helped steel her resolve to kill, then that tidbit of information would have made him a bit more apprehensive about Zabuza and his humanity. Instead though, it only strengthened his own belief that something needed to be done in the bloody mist, and he'd be the one to do it. As Naruto explained more about his first C-rank turned A-rank mission to his intrigued and amazed listeners, Kurenai perked up just before Kiba and Shino did at the same time. Naruto heard around the same time as Kiba, the distinct sound of footsteps crushing leaves at a quick pace. Someone was coming. No, scratch that. 3 or 4 people were coming swiftly. After a few moments in which everyone awaited with curiosity, it was surprisingly Hinata who spoke first as the shinobi that came from the tree line was recognized by her. And Niji-san. He hardly even acknowledged she was there, instead staring intently at the yellow-haired Uzumaki, who was wondering who he was. That's it for today, guys. I will stop here. I hope did you enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe for more amazing part of this video. And the important thing is don't forget to check it out, author of this series. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care until then, see you in next one.